بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. نويت تعلم وتعليم وتذكر التذكير ونفع انتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وبسنة الرسول صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم، ودعاء للهدى ودلالة على الخير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Imam al-Marzuqi rahimahullah ta'ala, he first and foremost speaks about what is wajib for the prophets, and he's going to make mention of 4 attributes that are wajib for each and every single one of the prophets. The reality, 3 of them are wajib for the prophets, with the 4th being what is wajib and definitive for the messengers themselves. And so he speaks radiyallahu anhu warda about the will fatana. First and foremost, he speaks about fatana, which is profound intelligence or sagacity, that the prophets have been endowed with a profundity of intelligence on behalf of the divine Jalla Jalala wa Ta'ala Azamato. One of the primary reasons is that the prophets, who now are bearers of truth from their Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala, shall be and will be opposed. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala capacitates the prophets with profundity of intelligence, sagacity, in order to engage, quote unquote, in argumentation with their nemesis, and to prove, quote, with the truth of that which they bear from him Jalla Jalaluhu wa Ta'ala Azamatu. In ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikma wa maw'idhatil hasana wa jadilhum billati hi ahsan, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and summon unto the way of your Lord, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with wisdom. And that wisdom there is the praxis, as you know, the word hikmah in the Quran is to praxis, the very way that the prophets themselves walk, which is the sir of nubuwwah, the secret of prophecy, in that they don't call in word, they call in deed. And by virtue of the example set, that got the human being hardwired to follow the example of a person before they're hardwired to follow the word of a person. As we say in English, actions speak louder than words. And so Allah Ta'ala, ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah, by virtue of practice. Wa maw'idhatil hasana, and that maw'idhatil hasana here is the issue of the Rusul now. So the Rusul now are going to articulate, they're going to speak on behalf of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the sifr of fatana, which is necessary, wajib lil anbiya wa jadilhum billati hiya ahsan, and on the basis of the profundity of intelligence endowed as a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because remember, the nature of nubuwwah, it's wahbi la kasbi. It's a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not something that is earned, acquired, quote unquote, from the environment in which the prophets are born, or from their people, or from their respective cultures. With jadilhum billati hiya ahsan, and now argue with them in ways that are more beautiful in the sight of the Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the first sifra is fatana, profundity of intelligence, which negates the opposite, which is mustahil, impossible for the prophets, that being balada, that being safa, that being ghabawa, that the prophets are not characterized in any shape or form by any degree, one iota of stupidity. Yani alayhimus salam. Then the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala is going to make mention of sidq, the second of the attributes, sidq. And sidq here is understood as truthfulness. Okay, that the tongue of the prophets is truthful. The impossibility of the prophets uttering a lie. Okay, and so the prophets, in terms of the truthfulness of the Prophet ﷺ himself said, لا يخرج من هذا إلى الحق. The only truth comes from this, pointing at his blessed tongue, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. That holds true for each and every single, any one of the prophets. And in that, they articulate mutabaqat lil-waqi', that everything that they utter corresponds in the absolute way to reality, to truth in and of itself. Okay, that is the issue of truth, the impossibility of the Prophet's line. And the third of them, the Imam rahimahullah ta'ala makes mention of, is amana. And some of the Imams rahimahullah ta'ala will see amana as a separate, quote, necessary attribute for the prophets, known through its contraries, as the Imams rahimahullah ta'ala say, through opposites things become clear. And so the opposite of amana is khiyana, i.e. the prophets are trustworthy, the impossibility of them being treacherous. As the Prophet ﷺ, it is impossible for a prophet to be treacherous and yakhuna. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Will be tarfat, even with the glance of an eye." Okay, so that's of the meanings of amana. But in general, that the Imam here al-Marzuqi rahimahullah ta'ala as introductory text by amana, what he wants from that is isma. Isma being infallibility. So by amana, the linguistic definition of aman is to be secured. Like the linguistic definition of aman, that you're in a state of security. And so the prophets are secured from sin. And so more often you adopt the term isma, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted them infallibility, that the impossibility of the prophets sinning outwardly as well as inwardly. The impossibility of a prophet, as he said, committing an act of murder. The impossibility of a prophet, for example, committing an act of adultery. The impossibility of a prophet, for example, consuming alcohol, etc. Outward. Impossible for the prophet to consider anything that Allah to commit anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has legislated in accordance to the law revealed to them. And that's an important point, that is contradictory to that law, that is considered to be something that is illicit, i.e. haram. Likewise, the Imams say that is makruh, that is considered to be disliked by the law. And the Imams rahimahullah ta'ala even say something that is considered to be khilaf al-awla, to be something that is what is considered khilaf al-awla, inappropriate in terms of legal dictates, okay? If we see an example in a prophet, we have an example of a prophet committing something that is khilaf al-awla or makruh, as an example, a hadith in Bukhari of the Prophet sallallahu Bukhari and Muslim, of the Prophet sallallahu doing the acts of wudu marra or marrataini, once or twice. According to the fuqaha, some of the fuqaha, that to do an act of wudu once or twice is makruh. But for the Prophet ﷺ to do that, it's min bab ta'aleem, that the Prophet ﷺ is teaching one, but the permissibility of doing that, but also legislating the karahiyya, that is disliked to do that, because that there enters into the chapter of legal theory, of how we understand laws. We extrapolate laws from the words, but more importantly, from the very acts of the Prophet ﷺ. And from the likes of that is the Prophet ﷺ, as an example, drinking standing up, or the Rasul ﷺ urinating standing up ﷺ. His performance thereof, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ مُعَلِّمًا, that I've been sent as a teacher, and as a teacher also a legislator ﷺ. As with the prophets, seemingly doing something that one could consider to be haram. I do often question about Sayyidina Adam alayhi salam eating from the tree, often believed to be the fig tree. Or that Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, as in hadith al-Bukhari, as Sayyidina Ibrahim, he uttered 3 lies, and he never lied except in 3 instances. That there, now it needs a ta'wil. We've got to reinterpret what does that mean. It doesn't mean a lie literally, but for instance, in the case of Sayyidina Ibrahim, but it means that a tawriya, that he said something that the one who was said to misconstrued the actual intent of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. Once again, the Prophet, the infallibility, that's in relation to the haram. That if it's something that is if it's makruh or khilaf al-awla, then that's understood from the chapter of ta'aleem or the chapter of legislation. And if it's something that is haram, seemingly they commit something that is haram, that's reinterpreted to understand that it's more so a tawriya or the like. The Imams rahimahullah ta'ala will thereby said. And then the last of them is the issue of tabligh, which is conveyance. That there is not upon the prophets, as we've heard. The prophets, lam yu'mar bi tabligh, they've not been commanded to convey. Whereas that's upon the messengers, and it's definitive for the messengers, that the messengers are under the commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to convey the import of the message that has been revealed to them. Illa, and the opposite thereof, is what's called kitman, is to conceal that which has been revealed. But the Imams rahimahullah ta'ala, they say the commandment to convey is of 3 types. The first type is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands them to convey without distinction. And so they cannot, the prophets now and the messengers cannot cannot withhold 1 iota of that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has commanded them to convey. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, O messengers, and convey that which were commanded to convey. Okay, and if you do not convey, then you have not conveyed His message. You have not conveyed the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, the second is where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the opposite, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands them to conceal. That which has been revealed to the prophets in question is only for the prophets in question. They're not now to to what? To convey to anybody beyond themselves. So it's personal between them and Allah Jalla Jalaluhu wa Ta'ala Azamatuh. Where the third of them is khiyar, is jawaz now. Yani to convey or not to convey. And the basis of the khiyar, of the jawaz here, of the permissibility, is they convey to those of ahliyah. They convey to those who are duly qualified to embrace that which has been revealed unto them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and given them the choice therein to convey, but they also conceal to others rahmatan, as a mercy for them, in that they don't have the ahliyah or the capacity to embrace that which is the import of revelation, the import of the law revealed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. We ask Allah ta'ala for nadar. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.